Well, Lewis, I've known you for 3 years, and I came to you after a history of being involved in Gurdjieff groups, three in total. And while I'm grateful to those people who taught me various things, there wasn't a lot of work on the emotions, which turns out to be rather important. And most of the work I've done with you, in fact, nearly all the work I've done with you, really, has been on the emotions. So it's transformed my inner emotional nature to a large extent. Certainly, I'm not the same person today as I was 3 years ago. So I suppose I ought to tell people who you are exactly. I'm speaking to Luis Almeida, who runs the group. Well, you're based over in near Los Angeles, I believe. What's the exact town, Luis?
It's Santa Monica.
Santa Monica. Uh,
It's about 15, 20 minutes to Los Angeles on the freeway.
right. Okay. Anyway, Luis Almeida runs a group over there. He himself had a teacher, and he'll tell you about that in a moment. And he has, well, it varies. I think anywhere between half a dozen and maybe a dozen students at any one time. And he's the, you know, he. I owe a lot to Lewis, and you may be interested to hear his story to some extent. So I'll hand it over to you, Lewis. How did you get into all of this?
I was about 30 years old, and my ex-wife and I, uh, we were searching. We attended other groups. We were involved with the Maharishi during the 60s. I think you know the Beatles
Yeah.
uh, were involved with Maharishi, and he was very popular at the time. And that worked for about a year or two, but I still felt um, not really connected with it. I didn't feel that I was making any changes. Uh, I was looking for something because I felt very inadequate, um, feeling worthless in reality. Even though I had a business and seemed everything seemed to be okay, but yet I felt um, that my mind was of a inferior quality. What do I mean by that? It's just that I didn't feel very smart. That's the bottom line. I married a woman who was very intelligent, and I thought maybe just by being with her that besides her beauty, she had this intelligence. Um, and so I felt that made me feel smart, but it really didn't change my true feeling of feeling inadequate. What do I mean by feeling inadequate? My emotions took the best of me. When I experienced something that I could not understand, such as, say, someone would give me a contract and to sign for a lease agreement on a new business that I was entering in. At that time I was a hairstylist, and I was going into business uh, owning a beauty salon. I got into the field of hairstyling because college and well, education was out of my reach. I felt my mind was very weak. I couldn't understand um, concepts, and following a contract was very difficult. I had to have someone help me understand, and then my wife actually helped me understand the contract. I was very much in touch with my pain, and I think that Gurdjieff talks about that there are different states in individuals. I mean, there are different centers. He talks about several centers, but the ones that I focus on, that there are individuals who are focused on that there are either intellectual, or someone might be emotional, and an individual might be physical. So these are different centers that we all have, but one center might be dominant. And for me, my dominant nature was emotional and physical. So I could do things very well visually. So I became a hairstylist. And my wife, she was more intellectual. What troubled me was I had a difficult time having conversations with my wife, my ex-wife, and her friends. We would have these parties, and it was very difficult to participate. I felt excluded, and being excluded is very painful. And we had these friends that also had a group. This friend had a group that had to do with metaphysical. He believed in reincarnation. He believed in astral traveling. At that time, Edgar Cayce was very popular. And then remember, this is in the 60s. I've been doing this work for now over 45 years. And this friend, we were in his group for a couple of years, just learning the studies of black magic, if you call it. I was born into the Catholic Church, but never really got into the Catholic Church. I felt there was nothing there that really helped me improve my thinking or my feeling of myself. And this friend of mine, gratefully, found my future teacher, Gregory Grover, who lived in West Hollywood, who had a group in West Hollywood. And this friend of mine mentioned to me that Gregory does not work with everyone. And right away I felt fear that he wouldn't want to work with me. For some reason, I felt that I think we all have this ambition. If somebody wants something or likes something, we want that also. Because this friend of mine, his name is Hal Wilcox. He was so excited about Gregory and his group, and that stimulated me. And I wanted that too. And one thing about my friend Hal, he believed that he was a reincarnation of Gurdjieff, and he wanted my teacher to acknowledge that. And Hal would say some fantastic things. Also, he would believe that he was kidnapped by intercellular beings or interstellar beings from outer space. And I half-heartedly believed in him, but he was interesting. But when I met my teacher, the first day I met him, first evening, there were several students. Some students were sitting. He lived in a small two-bedroom apartment in West Hollywood, in California, and it was about a less than an hour drive from where I lived. And when I first met him, it was I don't know what the word is. It was like I felt something. And I thought, this is what I want. He did have he looked like my father. And my father was very light complected. I'm dark complected. My parents are from Mexico. And, but this man called Gregory, as he began to speak, what I felt was, I immediately thought, this is what I want. He said something like this. He said, man is not a master of himself, and the goal will become a master of his emotions. And I knew then that I was not in control of my emotions. Basically, my emotions were out of control. I'll give you an example. one evening, and this happened quite frequently, I would have a conversation with my wife, or try to, and she would say something, and it touched something in me, touched one of my, we call it anger buttons. But it really touched my weakness. And my weakness is that I thought she was ridiculing me. I thought I felt put down. And I just burst out in tremendous rage and anger. And I picked up a wine bottle and threw it across the room and hit the wall. Made a big mess. I've destroyed living rooms and dining rooms with my rage. And I wonder, many years later, I wonder how did this, what goes on? And I began to see that my rage and my anger, well, yes, expressed my weakness, but how? Why did I do that? Why did I break things? Some people suppress their anger and they go into depression. Others express their violence towards their loved ones or family members or strangers. But my anger was a duplication of as I saw my father. And that's how he handled his anger, is that he would explode. If his expectations were not met, he would go into his rage, and he took his rage on his children. He had 7 boys and 4 girls. So I met my teacher, and I remained with him for 24 years.
So what about his teacher? Where did he come from?
I believe his teacher, his name is Dr. Kettner, Frederick Kettner. He came from, I believe it's Romania. I could be wrong about that, but he was in Europe. He lived in Europe. And he found Spinoza at the age of 17. And his brother brought the ethics, Spinoza's ethics, home, and left it on the table, on a coffee table. And Dr. Kettner, while as a young man at 17, picked it up and began to read. And he got excited about it. And his brother came in and saw his younger brother with this book and told him, "Give me that book. You're too young. You shouldn't be reading this." But what Dr. Kettner did is bought his own book, and he rented a flat and began to study Spinoza under candlelight. And this must have been in the early 20th century. I mean, in the early 1900s. And from there, what I've heard is that Dr. Kettner tried, after he began to understand Spinoza, he began to start his own group. And he found that the traditions, say he lives in Romania, he lived in Romania, he found that people are so locked up in tradition, in how conventionality. It was very difficult for them to accept Spinoza's philosophy. And Dr. Kettner wondered if if the Americans, if the United States, people in America would be more open to his ideas, because he wanted to communicate what he has learned. Rare is the individual who can pick up a book and begin to follow. I couldn't do that. It took me years to begin to open up Spinoza. And but Dr. Kettner eventually moved to Chicago and started a group. And my teacher met his teacher, Dr. Kettner, probably when my teacher was about 20 years old. So that must have been in the 30s, during the Great Depression.
I know that Dr. Kettner got quite a large following in India, didn't he, I believe? Is that right?
Well, yes. Dr. Kettner wrote several books, and my teacher, Gregory Grover, was also an editor. He went to college, and Dr. Kettner needed someone to help edit his material. And a lot of Dr. Kettner wrote a lot of many articles and also poems. Um, and these were distributed throughout the world. And India was a great love of Dr. Kettner's material, his poems, his writings. He didn't have a group there, but his writings were really appreciated and well read in India.
Yeah, I can imagine the Indians liking it because Spinoza is very often likened to Vedanta, the pantheists, that God is part of everything, at a superficial level anyway, that kind of understanding. So I can imagine the Indians might quite like what Dr. Kettner
Yes,
was saying.
yes. India, I think, am I thinking of India or Eastern philosophy? The idea of yoga or other practices, meditation. And there's a lot of good things, no question about it. But my teacher realized something that when he was a student, uh, there was my teacher, I mean, he had a great following. There must have been hundreds of students. And they rented this big apartment building and they had several floors. And many of the students lived together like a fraternity, a group of individuals in a particular apartment. And they would meet weekly. And one of the students was from India, and he would seldom meet. He didn't like the idea of meeting. And the idea of meeting was the students would begin to want to open up about themselves, begin to observe one's emotions. Um, and the emotions are really important for us to begin to learn how to see them because we're really not in touch with our emotions. Um, but this particular individual felt that meditation was priority to studying, to having these meetings. It took away from his meditation. These studies took away from his meditation. And my teacher, we began to see the flaw of Eastern philosophy. Meditation, yes, is wonderful, puts us in a mental, wonderful state. But if an individual does not get into his emotions and begin to see them and help others help him see his emotions and understand what they are, the individual cannot really develop his, I would say, his mental powers. Because what enables to see our emotions? There must be an intelligence in the individual. This intelligence has the power to see, the power to understand. And if that is not activated, no growth is possible. The individual who just meditates, yes, goes into this so-called a spiritual feeling, but that's all it is. It's a spiritual feeling. It's not really real. It goes into imagination. So this is what I understand. I have a limited understanding of Eastern philosophy, but from my work with Spinoza, I find that even Spinoza, who lived in the 17th century, his philosophy today is so far advanced. Very few people can really comprehend him, much less make the effort to begin.
Yeah, well, as you know, I had Spinoza stood on my bookshelf for 10 years and found it impenetrable. I just couldn't understand it at all until until I started talking with you. And the the thing that is very much on my mind right now, and your view on it would be interesting, is the Eastern religions have sold as a whole pile of notions. Enlightenment being probably the one that most people hang on to. This idea that there is some different state for the human being that takes us away from the pain of existence, if you like, I think most people are seeking enlightenment because they want to get away from pain. What's your view of that?
Wonderful subject, Martin. Wonderful subject. That individuals run from pain because pain is painful.
Yeah.
Nobody wants pain. And it's interesting that these are what is called monasteries, where individuals, there might be hundreds of individuals in this monastery, which could be very beautiful settings. Trees, they have their own vegetable gardens, few fruit trees, could be a babbling brook. And there are walls within this sanctuary. There are many like this, people who go into retreats, who want to feel enlightened. And the wonderful thing about the idea that it's possible for us to be enlightened shows us that human nature can be raised above where he is or she is. So the enlightenment idea is I would say symbolic to what can be true. What is enlightenment is some people call a higher consciousness. But what is higher consciousness? If an individual does not know himself or herself, you go to these retreats or these meditative states, yes, it does go, we feel enlightened, but it doesn't change anything. We feel this magical euphoria. It's almost like taking a drug.
Yeah.
I know this one individual, one other student who went to Peru. He's been with me for a couple of years. I won't mention his name, but he's been with me for a couple of years now. And he was following Gurdjieff, but he could not understand Gurdjieff. And he was frustrated because he felt he was pretty smart. Why couldn't he not understand Gurdjieff? So he had this idea, and he heard that there was these potions that this particular drug made from plants, and it was a liquid, and you would drink this, and it will give you enlightenment. So he spent over a couple of $1,000s to get there. He doesn't make a lot of money, but this was a great investment. He had a belief, expectation that he'll be enlightened, and maybe he will understand Gurdjieff, or give him more mental power. And the first night I asked him what happened. He said he felt like he was dead. And I said, you experienced the truth. That is true. One thing that's Gurdjieff, and I love Gurdjieff, I don't read all of Gurdjieff. I find a lot of it is not useful for my work. What I love about Gurdjieff is his philosophy on human nature, the psychology of human nature. And he says something very profound. He says, man is asleep. What is asleep? I'm walking around, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But man is asleep to his higher nature, his true intelligence. So when the student saw that he was dead, and he was afraid, and I said, that is reality. The fact is that your mind is asleep. Your true thinking mind is asleep. Most people do not realize that they're not really living. And this is why this idea, this attraction towards nirvana, this higher consciousness, is almost symbolic of what is possible. I've been doing this work for 45 years, and I'm still learning what this work is about. Spinoza has given me a method to understand what is to be awake, what is the true intelligence. And we could only come to the true intelligence is through the emotions. And how is that possible? Because through the emotions, we see the truth. When we are angry, there's a beginning of anger. Anger, the definition of anger is hate, is the desire to move the object of our hate. Oh, I'm sorry. Anger is hate. I'm lost here. What is the definition?
You're under pressure, Lewis. Well, hatred is a pain. It's pain.
But the definition of anger is a desire to move the object of our hate. Anger, look at this. Anger is a desire. Look at that. Desire to remove the object of our hate. So we hate something. We want to remove it. Now look at this. Hate is pain. Hate. Now we have hate. Hate is pain. And we believe that something or an object is the cause of our pain. So hate is pain, and we want to remove the object. Or say, hate is pain, and we believe that someone or that person is the cause of my pain.
Yeah.
But there's a beginning called pain. It starts with pain. We feel impotent. We feel powerless. We feel a lack. But we don't want that. That is too painful to see. So we have to destroy or remove the object that caused the pain. Just like you have a splinter in your finger. It hurts. And if you leave it there, it will become infected, and your finger is very sensitive. Wonderful things about the body. It has all these nerves, pain indicators. Our body, our natural body, has these emotional pain indicators. And what do they indicate? Basically, that we're not doing very well. We're not functioning in life very well. We're not getting what we want. Desire is the essence of man, Spinoza explains. Desire is the essence of man. We all want something to persist in our existence. So nirvana is a wonderful state to be, but how to get there? That's a question. And most people believe that if the Eastern philosophy, and it's so easy, you just go into a place to meditate. And it works. It helps. People can modify their behavior to a certain degree. But they don't really develop their true intelligence.
Yeah, well, that's the... I remember when I was in the Gurdjieff work, they would talk about Eckhart Tolle, for example. And they would say, well, the guy's got something. The problem is he's not a teacher. Because he doesn't... I mean, he may be, but to my knowledge, he's not taking on individual students, because what I've found is that this work requires one-on-one attention on an ongoing basis. Just going to general meetings and groups and what have you will never ever get you down to the core of what is causing you pain, or what is causing you to be confused or whatever. So as such, someone like Eckhart Tolle is not really a teacher as such. I mean, he's selling a lot of books and doing a lot of courses and so on. And I don't doubt some people benefit from that. But at the end of the day, the thing I've learned working with you is that the understanding of the emotions and developing some level of mastery of the emotions is a one-to-one effort between the student and the teacher. And I can't see that anything would ever replace that. So, I don't know. Well, fortunately, there aren't huge numbers of people who want to do real work. That's the reality of it. So maybe it works out sort of fine in that your time and effort is limited, uh, and I guess the only way that your skills and your knowledge can be made available to a broader audience is through people who've worked with you doing the same thing. Um, but what I found all the way through all of this work, both with the Gurdjieff and working with yourself, is that the idea that some mass movement is going to deliver liberation or enlightenment or happiness or whatever is totally misleading, because it needs one-on-one work between a student and a teacher. And I know at the end of his life, Gurdjieff just worked with a handful of people. I mean, that's what he did for the last 5 years of his life, or whatever.
What I realized, Martin, is that this work is not for the masses.
No.
And Spinoza was very clear. In his work, he says this work, his books were not to be read by the masses. Only a few will be able to put in the effort to want something like this. And at first it might be an intuition, but an individual must be, say, dissatisfied with their life. This is not for the person who fails life, but first a person who actually is who has a comfortable life, but yet they're dissatisfied with it because it doesn't have real, true meaning. What's interesting about human nature, built in man and woman, are these inner sensitivities that there's more to life. It can be your intuitive nature that says there's more to life than all this material things that I've gained. When I met my teacher, I should have been a happy man. I had a business, I had 6 employees, I was a hairstylist, I had my own clientele, I had a home, cars, a couple of cars, I had money, I had apartments. And yet, I left everything to join my teacher because my ex-wife decided that she didn't want this anymore after 8 years of being with my teacher. And I knew if I left and kept my relationship with my ex-wife, that I would lose everything that I was gaining. And yet, because I knew I was afraid that I would go back to the man that I was, and I didn't like that man because that man felt inferior, continuously feeling impotent about his mental powers. And I began to have a deeper sensitivity about not only but experience a new sense of self through the works and the method of Spinoza and Gurdjieff. The self is what we want to develop. This new sense of self comes from real self-introspection. Because when we begin to know what an emotion is, what anger is, what hate is, what envy is, what jealousy is, what contempt is, what is hate, we begin to understand the definitions through Spinoza. And like you said, something very important, Martin, and Gurdjieff emphasizes this, that we cannot do this by ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to lie. We need other people to help us see where we are, especially someone who's been there, a teacher or a leader, a group leader. My teacher had hundreds of students, and I'm the only one that has continued his work, or say the work of Spinoza. I'm thankful to my teacher. I'll be forever thankful, because he helped me see the tools. I had to pick up those tools. I do not give understanding to my students. It's already there. They just have to pick up the tools to learn how to see and work with their own understanding. They must begin, or they must want to begin to realize that there's something different in them, a different level of intelligence. So there's intelligence. There's a kind of intelligence of the mind that deals with life, how to live life. I won't say how to exist, the word living must come from a different part of nature. An individual can really learn how to live from freedom. You call liberation, freedom. Eckhart Tolle talks about a wonderful state called the state of now, the power of now. The question is how to get there. And I wrote a little, I made a comment on one of these videos of Osho. And I put down, a comment was I put down from Gurdjieff and Spinoza, commenting on Osho and Eckhart Tolle. And I said, these individuals have profound information. I said, wonderful information. One and it it feels good, but there is more to what they're communicating because I think it satisfies the majority of people because more people are into feelings and imagination. But they don't realize there's more to feelings and imagination. There is work, and that's what people want to avoid. The effort of work is how to act or live from one's true intelligence. That's the work. And that's why one-to-one, working with one-to-one is much more, it's direct and much more, it's difficult for the new students. I was in my work, my teachers for 24 years, and I tell my students, if you work with me directly, one-to-one, it's like working with me in 1 year, working with me one-to-one is like 5 years working in an open meeting group.
Yeah. Yeah, I can testify to that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, Lewis, I think we're probably going to have to wind this up, but we've been going for 20, I don't know, maybe about 40 minutes. So I've enjoyed this, so I guess we'll probably do another one at some point. Yeah, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it also.